Premiere Pro 101. This is a webinar for an intro to the Premiere 101 class. This is basically what I'd be teaching on day one of the class. We have Premiere 101 classes coming up at KeyCode Education, and you can learn more about all the other classes that we're offering at keycodeeducation.com, and that is two E's in the middle of that URL, in case you're wondering. Welcome, everybody. Hope you get something out of today. I'm going to be starting with the basics of Premiere and kind of going through workflow and setup and how to put together your system and best practices for organizing all of your files, your media, and where to put things and to keep things nice and tight and organized. And then diving into the application and working directly with the software and showing you how to get everything set up, giving you a lay of the land. This course, and today in particular, is geared towards the beginner or the novice editor, or someone who's been using Premiere for a little bit, but has been kind of learning on their own and wants to know how to do things the right way, in case you're struggling with where to find things and how to set up your system and your preferences and the software, for example, which is how I started. I dove right into Final Cut 7. Wasn't even back then. It was, I don't want to tell you what version number it was, but that's how I learned Final Cut Pro. And after a few months of mucking around and not knowing what I was doing, I finally took a course and it all made sense to me. So if you find yourself in the same boat with Premiere, welcome. That's what this is for. And hopefully you'll get something out of today. I'm looking at my image right now. I'm not looking that great, so I apologize. It's terrible lighting on my part, but I had to kind of throw some stuff up here based on the lighting outside, so I apologize for that. But it's not about me and my face. It's about Premiere. So let me get some stuff set up here, and we will get started. And I need to go back and, all right, that's not what I wanted to do. Pardon me. I'm going to share my screen here, and we are going to go to Keynote. So again, welcome to Premiere Pro 101. My name is John Knowles, in case I didn't say that earlier. And again, this is being offered by KeyCode Education. Normally this class would be held in person, but right now with the current crisis, we're doing all this online through Zoom. So when these classes are offered, it is 4 days broken up into 4-hour chunks per day. And they're offered all throughout the day. So if you have a particular time that works for you, check and see if that time is available. We go morning through evening, Pacific Standard Time. So find a block that works for you. Okay, so let's talk about the advantages of moving to Premiere in the first place. Why would you want to choose this software? One of the big advantages of Premiere is it does have a modern architecture. Most of the newer NLEs, nonlinear editors, have this right now. But in case you're someone who's still working in the old version of Final Cut, for example, there's some hard limitations with that software. It's not 64-bit. And by 64-bit, I mean that is the way that most current operating systems work. The newest version of Mac OS, for example, Catalina, 64-bit apps only. No 32-bit apps are even allowed in that operating system. And that trend has been going on for a while. And the newer versions of Windows obviously are also 64-bit. And so you want software that takes advantage of that system. So that's why you want to get off of the older architecture as soon as you can, because eventually you're only going to be able to run those older programs on older hardware, aging machines that eventually will fail. So going forward, Premiere continues to contain modern architecture, and they'll keep modifying the program. They release a new version every year. They'll keep up with industry trends and keep modifying the software to work with the most current hardware. The other thing about Premiere that's great is the Mercury playback engine. That's built into the software. It's not something you have to turn on or off, but you can turn it off actually, but it's on by default. And Mercury playback engine is the built-in components that really try to give you real-time playback as much as possible. That's not as much of a problem as it used to be with hardware, with drop frames, for example. But the Mercury playback engine is a powerful piece of software that's trying to give you the best possible image and to play back your footage in real time so you can edit more accurately. And that is built in, and it relies on your graphics card, so whatever GPU you have, and you set up the acceleration mode that works with your GPU card. And very simply on the Mac now, that's Metal, the new Metal acceleration. Metal 2 is the current number in Catalina. And if that doesn't work for you for any reason, you can drop it back to the older acceleration called OpenCL. And I'll show you an example of all this. If you are on an older version of the Mac OS, like High Sierra, or you are on Windows, you can use an NVIDIA card and use the CUDA acceleration that NVIDIA makes for that. And again, that ties back into the Mercury playback engine and allows you to play back all your footage. And the other nice thing is that it has native format support. And again, this is not as much of a problem as it used to be. Some NLEs still struggle with this. And by that, it means pretty much any video format can be dropped right into the software, and you can drop it on a timeline and you can play it back. Now there's some caveats there. There's some older things, especially on a Mac, that won't necessarily work. Older versions of, say, the MPEG codec. If you have an older camera that maybe shoots MPEG-2, you have some issues. AVIs don't work so great anymore. There's other older codecs that don't work. But if you're pulling something off the web, for example, or you have someone gave you a clip to work with, and it's an MPEG-4, H.264 standard web codec, H.265 now, footage shot with an iPhone, for example, that can all be edited directly in Premiere Pro, and you don't have to transcode it to another format to make it work. And you can make proxies if necessary, but most of those modern formats will work on the timeline, and it can be mixed together. And you don't have to have a consistent timeline if you don't want to. You don't have to have all ProRes, for example, or all MXF. You can mix and match those formats, and Premiere will do its best to keep up with the changing in the frame rates and the different codecs. And again, that's part of the Mercury playback engine. That's what it's built to do. And Premiere will simply write some cache files that will help all that stuff play back as best as possible. We also, then again, that goes to the open timeline. You have an open timeline. The timeline does not have to contain any particular codec or format. And you also don't have the requirement, as you will with other NLEs. So DaVinci Resolve, for example, you basically set up a project at a certain size and a certain frame rate, and everything is locked in. Premiere does not have that limitation. The project that you make can contain any timeline of any frame rate of any size that you want, and you can mix and match the media on those timelines without any kind of restrictions on what you're doing. So that's to me, that's pretty nice. I don't want to have to set a project setting at jump and then have to adhere to it the whole time. I may have subsequences or other parts of the project that contain entirely different media, and I want to have the freedom to change that at will, or even change the sequence once I've made it to a different size or frame rate. That's all possible within Premiere Pro. And finally, we have the interoperability with the rest of the Adobe suite. And that's an advantage that really Adobe has over other software. There are very few competitors to Photoshop that are out there. Certainly none that are part of a larger suite of products that all work together. You have Premiere Pro, you have Adobe After Effects, you have Photoshop, Audition, and Media Encoder, and all of those things work together in an ecosystem, and they all can bounce back and forth between each other using the system known as Dynamic Link. And Dynamic Link, again, is built in. It's not something you even have to turn on or touch. Should have been installed with your software in the system, and that will allow the software to see each other and, for example, send something to After Effects and then work on it in After Effects, and then we'll round trip automatically back into Premiere Pro, or round trip to Audition. Some audio you want to clean up, or maybe a song that you want to scale, make a time change on the song without messing up the tempo. You can send it out to Audition, link it right back to Premiere Pro, and keep working, bounce back and forth. So that's the advantage of the Adobe ecosystem, unlike other NLEs. So if you're working in Avid, for example, and you're working with After Effects artists, or you're working in After Effects, you know that you have to render everything out of After Effects as self-contained movie files, bring them into The software, if there's a change or an edit, you have to go back in After Effects and redo it and re-export it. You don't even have to do that in Premiere. You can keep working in After Effects and making changes, and you never have to render out of After Effects if you don't want to. It can all live on the Premiere Pro timeline and be rendered out of that software at the end of your project. Okay, so let's talk about best practices, and let's talk about project folders. You want to stand, this is for when you first get started, you're thinking about setting up your project. You want to set up a project folder standard for yourself. And even if you are a one-man band, a one-person band, working by yourself, I still encourage this. Obviously, this is important for a facility, a company, a larger work group of people. It's important to keep the same type of folder structure and hierarchy in your projects. And so that everyone knows where things are at all times, and you know exactly what folder to look in if you're looking for an element. But like I said, if you are working on your own, I still encourage this because it's good. It's a good mindset to be in, and you can always go back to an older project in your archive drives, and you will be able to find what you're looking for because you have this system set up for yourself. And you never know, of course, you may wind up working someplace. You may give up being a freelancer for a while and wind up getting work at a company or a facility, and they're going to have a standard that they're working with. And if you already have that mindset, it's much easier to plug into their way of doing things and organizing the projects. This keeps everything together in one strict folder hierarchy. It's not pulling media from all over the place. And that is one thing to keep in mind about Premiere Pro. It does not create a library. As opposed to Avid, you don't have a central library where all the media that is imported or ingested into the project is automatically copied, okay? That's not how Premiere Pro works. Premiere Pro simply points and pulls from wherever the media or the file assets are located. And it doesn't care where they are, but if you go back to a project later and you've moved some of the assets, they'll be offline, and you're gonna have to hunt those things down. So this is why I encourage keeping everything together from the get-go. You don't want to be pulling, say, a photograph out of your downloads folder and using it in Premiere Pro. It'll work, it'll show up, but let's say you clean out your downloads folder a week later, that photograph's gonna be gone. So you need to take that photograph out of your downloads folder and move it into your photos or your artwork folder, for example. Keep everything together. Even if you have to copy things or duplicate things from your drives, I encourage you to always keep everything in the same project folder. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. I don't have it in the slides, so I'm going to have to pop out to my desktop here. The other thing about having a consistent project folder structure is it makes it really, really easy to archive. You don't have to do a collect at the end of the project. You want to avoid that as much as possible because it's not a very smooth process, unfortunately, in Premiere. That can lead to issues. So I encourage people just to archive the basic raw folder structure at the end. You can always delete the few things that you don't need, but that way it's just simply taking that folder, dragging it to your archive drive or your LTO tape or however you're going to back up and let it copy, and you're good to go. You don't have to hunt all over your hard drive or maybe multiple hard drives to look for all the various elements that you've used in your project. If you have everything in one folder structure, you can simply drag and drop your archive and call it a day. And we're going to get into best practices here, drive locations, media, shared storage. We are going to talk about that in more depth here in a second. But there are ways to set up Premiere based on your system that are more efficient than others. And we're going to talk about that. Where do you put your media? Which drive does your media go on? And which drive do you, where do you put your caches? Where do you put your scratch disk? And where do you put your application? There are best practices for doing that, and I'm going to show you those so you have a more efficient system, okay? So, okay. So hopefully you all see this folder hierarchy right here. So this is my standard project folder template. You don't have to follow this. This is an example, and obviously your company or facility may have a variation on this. That's totally fine. This is just how I propose to do it. If you don't have a system in place already, this is one method that you can take. And these are all empty, but I will just run through them really quick. So if on your media drive, which I will explain in a second here, on your media drive, you're going to have this folder hierarchy. Everything you're working on can go on the external drive, okay? There were occasions in the past, especially with Final Cut Pro 7, that we did not want to put everything in the media drive. The projects actually were supposed to live on the main hard drive next to the OS. We don't do that anymore. Everything lives on one drive, which makes backing up and archiving much, much simpler. So your Premiere Pro project file should not live on your computer, the main CPU. You want to put that, sorry, not CPU, the main boot drive. You want to put it in the folder hierarchy with the rest of your media, okay? That's a more efficient place for Premiere to pull the file from. And Premiere does not read or write to this project file on a continual basis. It loads it in RAM and keeps it in RAM, and then only reads and writes when you hit save, or it doesn't auto-save. Otherwise, it just kind of sits there. So it doesn't need to be on your main drive to get any particular bandwidth or any more speed. It is perfectly fine living on an external drive. So I keep my Premiere Pro project files in here, and I may have subfolders in here depending on the editor or depending on the date. However, I want to break that up, and I might have multiple versions of the Premiere Pro project saved. And even though there is a date assigned to anything any file you create on your OS, I always put the date that the project was created as well as a version number. And if I have multiple editors working, I usually put my initials, and then we can all see each other's work. So, and underneath that usually is, whoops, go back to update you later. Okay, back here. Sorry about that. Back to the Finder. Okay, underneath that, I have my raw footage, and we'll talk about best practices for bringing in raw footage here in a second. But that is all the media that I'm working with goes in here, except for things like graphics and After Effects files, which will be in the next folder. You want to copy your camera originals as best you can. So when you shoot out in the field, if you have your compact flash card, your CFast, or your fast SSD, USB drive, whatever you shot on, your Red Mag, whatever it is, put it in your computer, download it directly to this folder, and keep the folder structure intact. Okay, that's rule number one. Never alter the card structure of the camera original. Even if you want to go in and rename things because it's a mess, or you forgot to rename the items in the camera, or you couldn't rename the items in the camera and you want to add names that are more indicative of the footage, don't do that. Leave it all alone and rename everything in Premiere, and you can use things like metadata to keep things organized. But don't alter the original file structure of the card, because you may do something that basically ruins Premiere's chances of importing it, because that file structure is very important. It's expecting that file structure, and if you deviate from that file structure, it may not be able to read your media, or it may not be able to join two spanned clips together properly, or it may not be able to read the time code that was in a sidecar file. So don't ever go into your the card structure of your camera cards and start moving things around or deleting them, or think that I can just pull this one movie file out of its clips folder by itself. There's a lot of other things in there. They may look like they're unnecessary, but Premiere needs all of that information to read the media. And when we use the media browser in the software, that's how it's going to pull itself in. So it's all very, very important to use. So that, again, is a raw footage folder, and I divide it up by days. So it might be shoot day number 1, card A, card B, card C, card D, however it goes through there. Shoot day number 2. Keep everything organized and have multiple subfolders. That will help you stay organized on the back end as well. Underneath that, we're going to have graphics. Okay, and I usually have, I'm going to make a new folder in here. File and new folder. Okay, and I'm going to call that After Effects files. I can rename. Hello. There we go. After Effects. Okay, and that's usually in the top level of my graphics. Okay, and my After Effects project will go in there. I keep mine separate. If you want to put After Effects project files in your project files folder, that's totally fine. I like to keep my project files folder completely for Premiere. So I put After Effects files in the graphics folder, and then I might have subfolders in graphics as well that are for images, animations that maybe someone has made for me or that I've downloaded, any for lower thirds, for example, any graphics templates that I need. they may go in there as well. You want to keep, obviously, anything that's just basically a piece of artwork or an image or a photograph or anything like that that you're importing. You want to keep that in there. And then by having the After Effects files separate in there, you can keep track of all the various After Effects files, project files that you're working on, okay? So that goes in there. And then underneath this, by the way, and I'm using abbreviations. These are somewhat standard, but they change depending on the facility that you're working in. I've been shortening everything, so instead of writing out graphics, I just call that GFX. And MX is now for music. So that's what that means, but you can just title it music. It's totally up to you. And I keep all my music files in this folder. I may have several that I'm pulling in. They might just be MP3s that I'm auditioning, and then I get my final WAV files that I'm working on. So all the music goes in there so I can get to it really, really quickly. And I don't want to bury my music inside another audio folder. I like having it on the base level. That way I can just quickly drag and drop files as they come into my downloads folder. I can put them away where they belong. I may have temp folders in here as I'm auditioning files for the client for them to go in here and have dates based on when I presented them. And if they don't like it, then I make a new folder, make some more temps, keep going that way. And that's a folder that I might clean out before I archive because I'm going to get rid of all the MP3s that I did not use in the project and just keep the finals, okay? Now I have a separate audio file folder here, and that's for anything that's basically not music, okay? So I'm going to put a new folder in there, and I'm going to put in, let's see, what happened there? Whoops, that's not what I wanted it to do. Pull that back out. I'm going to put things like sound effects, which I shortened to SFX. Okay, it's sound effects. Put that in the audio folder. I'm gonna have that. I'm going to put in voiceover. Okay, that's what's gonna go into the other folder. I may have voiceover on this project. I'm gonna keep that in its own folder, keep that nice and organized. And there's also something else that may also go into this audio folder that's part of the scratch disk setup. Okay, so we're going to talk about that when we get to that point. Now I have a folder for my exports. Again, I like to keep all these things together, even if I'm going to post it on Dropbox or WeTransfer, or however I'm going to send it to my client. I like to keep the exports all together with the project. And usually I have those organized into things like internal. Okay, it's going to go in there. Or I have external. I've been doing this a lot lately because we've been doing kind of scratch work inside the company and showing each other work in progress that are not meant to be shown to the client at all. So I keep those completely separate from each other, and I have a different versioning system with numbers for internal versus external. So that way, when we finally do create the first cut that goes to the client, it's version 1. That makes sense to them. Still makes sense to me because my internal versions are maybe letters, A, B, C, D, or F. Or I use a point system, so internal cuts go from point 1 to point 9, and then version 1 is really version 1 that goes to the client. You never want to send the client something that says version 5. It might be your internal version 5, but that doesn't make any sense to them. It should not be. It's the first time they're seeing it. That should be version 1. So keep track of those file names when you're sending those things out. I may also have folders within these, especially on the externals. I might have for the client version, I might call client version, or web, because those will be heavily compressed. And then I may have my masters. So when I get close to the final, okay, and the masters will be full-size high-res files. It might be a ProRes or a Cineform file. That is a big, giant master file at the highest possible resolution. And then I can make my web cuts from that, by how I keep that master. And that's gonna be several gigabytes at least, but that's okay. I need that file in there, and then that's going to be locked, hopefully, and then I can make additional cuts from that. All right. Now below that is documents. I found myself needing just an extra folder that was a catch-all, okay, for things that didn't fit into any of these other categories. So documents might contain things like client notes. They'll send those to me. I like to keep those collected because I don't know about you, but I get them all kinds of ways. Pardon my horrible typing here. So client notes is often in my documents folder. I get them through email. Sometimes I get Dropbox notes. Sometimes I get texts. It's all over the place. I like to copy, paste those, put them in a consistent document, a Word doc or something simple. Keep those all together. That way, if there's a question, hey, did you get this note? Did we address this note? I can go back through and I keep them all here with the project. No one has to hunt through their emails to try and find that one note that we were missing, okay? It's all in there. I also like to keep the scripts in there. So if we're working off of a script document of any kind, that's a good place to store that. Again, I don't have to hunt on my hard drive or someone else's hard drive for the scripts. If it was emailed to me, I save it, take that PDF, drop it into the scripts folder. I can reference it while I'm working. Sometimes I need the script open in a window next to my edit while I'm going through in Premiere so I can keep track of those things. I may have to copy paste some text and things like that. So that's a good thing to keep in there. And lastly, if necessary, if there are custom fonts involved, sometimes I'll keep a copy of the fonts in the documents folder as well. That way, when I archive this, I'm not missing that font if I have to reopen this project back in there. So those are 3 things in there. And again, anything else you can think of, you might just need a miscellaneous folder in there, and that can contain whatever you want. But again, I just wanted to catch all for anything that didn't fit in the other categories goes in my documents folder. And last but not least is Scratch. I keep the Scratch disk with the projects. This has been something that I've kind of worked up to over the years. Normally I had just one big Scratch folder on my external drive that covered everything. And in this case, when I started working in Premiere, I realized it was better to keep them all separate because Premiere, fortunately, can track the locations of Scratch disks. You don't have to set it every time you open the program, which is really nice. So no matter where the Scratch disk was set, Premiere will remember that information as long as the files remains on the same computer that it started on. So I've been keeping the Scratch disks together with the projects. It makes moving them around or copying them easier. That way, if I have to give this to another editor and I've bothered to render the timeline, they'll get my render files as well. So that's kind of nice. And this is a temporary folder, meaning at the end of the project, when I'm archiving, I have to go to one place to delete the Scratch because I don't need it. The Scratch disk is going to be full of preview files, renders, audio previews, things like that. None of those things are necessary at the end of a project. They can all be trashed. There's one exception, and I'll mention that when we get into the Scratch disk setting. But for the most part, your Scratch disk can go away. And that's why I keep it here, because as I'm archiving, I go right to folder number 8 and throw it away. And that's going to save me a lot of space usually at the end of the project. Okay. Now, and I've left room here going forward 9, 10, 11. I can keep adding folders if I want to be more organized, just if there's a different type of asset that I haven't kept track of so far. So I left room in this template for more information, but this is the basic right here. And again, this is what I recommend, and this will live on your media drive, which I will explain in a second. And that's how we set up the program. So let's let me dive into Premiere here really quickly, and we'll go through some things, and then I'll talk about optimizing your program and your software. So let's jump into Premiere, okay? And I have this open here, so I will go back to Zoom and share the screen. And we're going to talk about Premiere for a little bit here, if I can find it. Where are you? That's crazy. All right, I'm just going to share the whole thing, and we're going to go to Premiere. All right, so hopefully you're all seeing that. Here we go. All right, so this is Premiere, and this is the splash screen you get when you first open the project. By the way, I'm working in Premiere version 14. That's part of the CC20 package. This is actually 14.04. Pull that up, yep, right there, build 18. At the time that we set this thing up, that's the version that I'm working on. There is a new version that is already out, Premiere 14.1, with a lot of new features, including Adobe Productions, which we will not get into in this seminar, but that's a brand new feature for working together as a team. So we'll not be covering that today, and I have yet to troubleshoot that new version. So this is the basic splash screen, and we have some options. So I'm on home right now, always on the top left here. There are some options here. I can go to Learn if I want to. These are all quick little tutorials about Premiere Pro. It's built into the software. A lot of people struggle with, where do I find the best information? I'm trying to learn how to do something, and they usually go to YouTube first, okay? Which is fine, and there are some great people on YouTube. I'm not discouraging you from that, but there's also a lot of bad information on there. There's a lot of tutorials from amateurs who don't quite know what they're talking about, and they may give you the wrong information, or it might be dated information. Their tutorial may cover an older version of Premiere, and it has no bearing on your version of Premiere. So you want to learn as much as possible straight from the source. Adobe has put out a ton of great tutorial material. They have a really robust online repository of information. Take advantage of it, okay? You're paying for this system. They're providing all of this to you. There's free training right here. And what you do is you click on one of these, and it will actually bring in media, okay? So if we go to this, that actually opens up a Premiere project like so. And there we go, save changes, yes. I'm getting a lot of dialog boxes here. Don't worry, I'll explain all those later. Save my project, there we go. In this case, this media was already loaded, and now I have this project already open. Okay, very nice. That just opened right up. I'm gonna close this project. All right, so let's talk about our hardware setup. Okay, so these are the hardware setup basics. So you've got your computer and you're trying to set it up for Premiere Pro. How do you want to do that? How do you want to delineate all your drives and so forth? So here's where we start. Okay, here's your CPU. Okay, this is your computer, desktop, laptop, doesn't matter. This is the computer itself. What goes on that computer? Okay, and again, these are best practices, best case scenario. On that CPU, on that boot drive, should be your operating system and the application itself. And that's really all you want to store on that computer, okay? You don't want to put your media on that computer. You don't want to keep your project files on that computer, and you don't want to keep your caches or your scratch disks on that computer. The reason being is the less work you can put on a drive, the more efficient it's going to be. And even with modern SSDs, oh, sorry, Premiere just launched and screwed everything up. So come on back. There we go. Even with modern SSDs, there's still a lot of bandwidth involved in reading and writing to file. And if you're making one drive do multiple tasks simultaneously, it's going to bog things down. So you want Premiere to be reading from multiple drives simultaneously, split the work, and it will be more efficient in the long run. And of course, as a boot drive, you want an SSD as much as possible. If you have an older system and it's struggling, chances are you've got an older spinning disk in there, and that's not going to work so great. And anytime you take that out and you drop in an SSD, you will see a massive improvement just overall, just in the running of the machine, but also in things like read-write access speed, the way your media plays back. It's night and day. In fact, I'm working off a laptop right now, but I have an older Mac Mini, for example, which was made in 2012 that had I believe it was a very slow 1 terabyte hard drive in there spinning at 5,400 RPM. Doesn't get any slower than that. That drive is a dog. I took that out and I replaced it with a solid state drive, 2 terabyte, and it's night and day. That thing flies. It's not a Ferrari, but it's certainly, if the old drive was a Pinto, it is certainly a very speedy little Mustang in there. So it's very nice, and it works so much better with that SSD in there. So again, SSD boot drive whenever possible. Next, you want to add your storage, okay? This is where your media goes, where your project file goes. That project hierarchy I just showed you, that's what goes on this drive, and then it also includes the scratch disk, okay? So fast array, what does that mean? If you're a novice and you're just setting up your editing system, you want a drive that is as fast as or faster than the data rate of the footage that you're working with. What do I mean by that? You can look up any camera, you can look up the type of files that it shoots and online, and you should be able to find a chart somewhere that tells you the data rate of the footage. In other words, when it's playing back, how much data, how many megabits or megabytes per second that footage requires for proper playback. And if your drive access speed does not meet that, you're going to have problems. You're going to have drop frames. You may have some sluggish response. It may even freeze on you. That's because your drive is too slow and it can't actually handle the throughput of the footage. Fortunately, these days, a lot of things have moved over to USB-C or Thunderbolt 3, and most drives that you buy that are on those newer standards are actually pretty fast. So Thunderbolt 3, if you're on a Mac, obviously is the way to go. I know they're expensive, but they're well worth it. And that is a really fast connection. Even the older Macs with Thunderbolt 2 work really great. So that's a good thing to set up. And by fast array, I mean have multiple drives together. That's kind of the best case scenario. And in this case, it's showing me a RAID. This is a G-Tech RAID. By the way, and I'm being company agnostic here. I'm not trying to promote one over the other. I'm just found some common drive images online here. So in this case, a RAID is, I can tell here, it's 4 different disks. Now these are spinning disks. This does not have to be an SSD array. Those are really expensive, right? When you start getting into lots and lots of SSD storage externally, they can cost you quite a bit. Now they're worth it. If you're working with really robust media, SSDs are the way to go. But you can use old-fashioned platters together in a RAID, okay? And that might be, and so basically the way a RAID works, if you're not familiar, all those drives are put together and their storage is added to each other so that instead of, say, 4 1 terabyte drives, the computer recognizes a single 4 terabyte drive. And then you want to have a level of protection on there if possible. So RAIDs, and those are numbers. You may have seen those: RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, and it goes on from there. There's a RAID 10 now. Essentially, RAID 0 is no protection. RAID 0 means the whole array is open to you. You have all of the storage available to you, and it is also very, very fast. The downside of that is there is zero protection for that data. If one drive in a RAID fails, the whole thing will go down and you will lose all of that data. All right, so that speed comes at a price. The way to safeguard yourself is to get another drive. I didn't put the photo on here, but you can get another drive that's cheaper, that's not as fast, that holds all the same amount of media that's on this fast array. So in other words, if this fast array is 4 terabytes, get yourself a 4 terabyte or a 6 terabyte USB 3 hard drive, something real cheap and can be really slow. Plug that into your main computer and set up a script with whatever program you want, or do it manually. Back up that drive every hour, every night for sure, but every hour as you're working, maybe even every half hour. The reason being is that USB drive will be the data backup for the RAID in case the RAID fails. Now, if you want another level of protection, you would change the RAID level. You go to RAID 1. RAID 1 cuts the drive storage in half. And so that 4 terabyte drive is now 2 terabytes. And it's 2 terabytes being mirrored onto another 2 terabytes inside. If those drives fail, you've got, on that single 2 terabyte portion of the RAID, you've got the backup on the other half. So you've got perfect backup within the RAID with a RAID 1, but you lose half of your storage. The third option most people go for is RAID 5. And RAID 5 basically takes a sliver of the entire RAID array and devotes it to backup. And one drive in the RAID can fail, and the whole, all the information is still recoverable. It's still on there. The performance will be diminished, but you can take that failed drive out, slap in a new one on the tray. The RAID will rebuild itself, and you're back in business. I do RAID 5 myself. Again, it's not as fast as a RAID 0, but for usually what I'm working with, it's fine. And if I need RAID 0 speeds, again, I use the larger external disk. So on that 4 terabyte drive, RAID 5 will usually give you 3 terabytes of usable space and devote 1 terabyte to the RAID archive or backup in this case. So RAID 5 is something to certainly look at. And the case you buy has to support these things. They're usually a hardware function. There is software like SoftRAID, for example, on the Mac side that will create a RAID for you. The Mac OS no longer contains the RAID functionality and disk utility, which is really annoying. I'm not sure how it is on Windows. I'm not as versed in Windows. But if your computer can't create the RAID, you may need external software to do it. But the hard drive case itself may come with all you need to make a hardware RAID on its end. There's actually a switch in the back when you set it up, and it wipes itself, and you're good to go. You need at least more than 2 drives to create a RAID 5. If you buy one of the smaller, cheaper RAIDs that only has 2 drive slots in it, it can only be RAID 0 or RAID 1. It can't take advantage of the RAID 5 that requires multiple disks. So that's how the RAID system works. Finally, moving on from storage, and again, that is the project file. The whole hierarchy I showed you goes on the fast array side of things. And finally, where to put your caches. People have gone back and forth on this for quite a while now, and finally Adobe has come down with a verdict and a ruling. For sure, they recommend doing this. This is a 3rd drive. So you've got your system, you've got your fast array. They recommend a 3rd drive whenever possible that holds your disk caches. What are the caches? Those are little files, again, that Premiere has to write to disk to put them on there, and that will allow for speedier playback on your timeline. And basically what it does is it conforms media and makes basically a little cache file that plays back a little smoother than the original media. And you'll see this happen to, say, MP3 music files, for example, are highly compressed. It's gonna make a little cache file of that. It definitely does it for H.264 footage. Again, heavily compressed, makes a little cache file, makes playing it back a little bit easier. It has to write them at the beginning of the project, and then it will refer back to them as much as possible. And the reason why we put this on a 3rd disk, again, let's split up the bandwidth. Let's not make our CPU do quite as much work on its own internal drive. Let's split off that function to another drive and allow it to do its own thing. And that cache can feed directly to the computer and take the load off of the built-in system drive. So this is usually best on an SSD. You'll not see a benefit for, say, plugging in a really slow USB drive to a USB port that has a spinning platter in it. Again, an SSD will do wonders for your cache. I have seen great results from people even on older towers, for example, like an older Mac Pro, the original aluminum cheese graters. They would throw in the cache and one of the other drive bays, set the cache to it, throw in an SSD, made things a lot more smooth, much more solid in their facility. If you have a tower, there's no reason not to grab a little SSD. You don't need a big one, and just throw it in there for the cache file. You've got the extra space, so go ahead and throw it in. If you have a CPU like what I'm showing here, this is an iMac, they generally don't have a 2nd slot for another drive. You may want to get a small one that just plugs in the back. And again, the newer USB-C SSDs, especially if it's a Gen 2, are really fast. That would be more than sufficient for the SSD. Even an older, slower Thunderbolt 2 solid-state drive would work on an older system. So as long as it's solid state, you should be in pretty good shape. And you can just, again, plug that in externally if you don't have an extra drive slot in your CPU. Now, this is for working on your own and on desktop. If you are working in a facility, it's a similar setup, but a little bit different because you probably have shared storage. So again, you've got your computer in your bay that's running your OS and is running the Premiere Pro software. And again, you want to have the cache on a drive that is plugged directly into that machine. The cache should not be on shared storage. That's not going to help you. And writing caches will take up a lot of bandwidth on a company network. So if you are working at a company and you're using shared storage and everyone's connected with fiber or 1 gigabyte Ethernet, if everyone is writing caches to the server, it's going to crash the system. So keep the caches local. And it's not a big deal if you're swapping projects between computers to have one computer rewrite someone else's cache. It's not that bad. So keep the cache local. And again, that's either another attached drive, or if you've got a tower, just drop in an SSD and you're good to go. Cache is local. Then you've got everything else is on your shared storage. You've got some type of shared storage system connected to your bay. That's where the project file goes. And even scratch disks if you want, and all the files and media can go there. That way any editor in the entire company can just access the single location and pull it onto, and they don't have to copy it to their computer, they can just access it directly off the shared storage. Premiere can use solutions like the Avid Nexus. Avid has kindly built-in functionality there, so Premiere just reads it like any other shared storage. As long as your computer can use the shared storage, Premiere can see it and utilize it. Adobe does not have its own hardware, so it can utilize third-party hardware like the Avid system or other SAN and SNS systems for shared media storage and pull it up that way. Shared storage is also really, really good for the new Adobe Productions workflow. Again, we're not going to get into that, but team sharing, internal team projects, sharing projects on the new Adobe Productions. Shared storage is the way to go for that. And then finally, if you're using your hardware on a laptop, let me show you the setup for that. It's somewhat similar, but so again, on your main computer, and you probably have an SSD at this point if you have a new laptop, that's totally fine. You definitely want to have that if you don't. So if you have an older laptop and you can remove the hard drive, I highly recommend replacing it with an SSD. You'll get a little more life out of it. And then you may have only one other drive. If you don't have the ability, a media cache disk, a third disk, it's all right, okay? Especially on Thunderbolt 3. If you are in a pinch, so you're out in the field working, you're in a car, you're on an airplane, you don't have room to stack all these crazy drives next to you unless you can borrow your neighbor's working tray there. So you may just have one drive that you plug in and kind of tuck behind it. So it's completely okay to put the cache together with the media. And if you use an external storage fast SSD, in this case, this is a very, very fast USB drive. It works over USB-C. It's a Gen 2. It's very, very fast. I have one of these. It's fantastic. I actually use it for a camera because it can write storage very, very quickly. This is all you need. And you take that project folder, again, put that on the external storage, and then point your caches to this card as well. Keep the caches off the internal drive if you can. Put the caches on the external storage, and you can work with one drive. You can certainly do this on your desktop as well if you don't have the capacity or the ability to add the external SSD as another drive. It'll make things more efficient, but if you don't want to do that, even with that, with the RAID that I showed you, you can put the caches on the RAID. I have a couple like that at the office. We don't have an extra drive hanging off the back of our older Mac Pro trash can units, so I just have everything on my Thunderbolt 2 RAIDs, and it works pretty well. So that's the option you want to use for that, okay? So that was hardware setup. This is the new recommendation from Adobe. They added this page a few months ago. It's a great resource, and this, I'll pull up the URL, the full URL right there, helpx.adobe.com, premiere/Pro/KB/hardware-recommendations HTML. I know that's really, really long, but if you search for this title here on the Adobe site, Optimizing Your System for Premiere Pro and After Effects, you will be able to find it. This is their new resource they put together. There was a lot of old information on here that dealt with, among other things, spinning platter hard drives and how to divide up your system to make that as efficient as possible. Obviously, we're well past spinning hard drives now, so they decided to update all this information. And I always point people here when they ask about a build. I see that a lot online. Hey, is this going to work? Is my hardware configuration going to run it? Do I have what I need? It's all here. Go to this document. These are the minimum specs. If your computer meets or exceeds these, fine. And it meant, okay? And right off the bat here, it's saying is minimum 32 gigs. And that's an easy minimum these days. Most systems you can configure for 32. Most professional laptops have that option. They can also go to 64 now. Certainly a tower, you can go to 32. So that's the minimum now. I've run Premiere with less. I'm actually running Premiere right now on 16, but they're recommending 32, which I agree with. For storage and hard drives, use solid state and NVMe or SSD. NVMe is the alternate to standard SSD. It's much faster. So, and it's saying unless you have a fast RAID array, spinning disks do not offer sufficient speed for HD and 4K video production. So that's in terms of the RAID, that fast array, they're saying get yourself a RAID for that and don't use a single hard drive. You may not have enough space. And how many drives do I need for video production? We just covered this, the system drive for the OS and the applications, the drive for the cache, again, that's that extra external storage, the SSD, and a media drive or shared storage. If you, graphics card, GPU, that's pretty important. They're giving a minimum amount of RAM for the card that you use. Now, a lot of people are really stressed about the video card for Premiere. Premiere does use it. It doesn't use it all the time. Certain tasks require the GPU more than others. So get yourself a card that at least has 4 gigabytes of VRAM. And again, I've run it on slower. I think I'm running it on 2 gigabytes right now. I certainly see the effects of that. I have sluggish performance on my renders, and my old Mac Mini can barely keep up with me. once I start using things like previews and GPU intensive effects. So I don't use it for those things. So you need to beef your graphics card. If you have an older laptop, but you have Thunderbolt capability, you can use an external GPU to try and get you there before you can afford a new system. If you have a tower, obviously swapping GPUs out is much simpler. It works totally fine with AMDs. A lot of people say, you've got to have NVIDIA. You've got to have NVIDIA. It's not true. Premiere works perfectly great with AMD cards. And if you're on a Mac, that's obviously your only option. Okay. So it will work with either one. You just have to set your graphics acceleration to use the correct software for your card. And again, 4 GB is the minimum. And under here is the processor speed. They're saying the sweet spot is 8 cores. And that's actually pretty important. You can't give Premiere too many cores. It's not going to take advantage of them. And I don't want to get in the weeds here on building out a computer system, but if you have the choice of cores, don't go overboard. I've seen the benchmarks. It's not proven to help in any way if you have, say, a 28-core beast of a machine. That's for much more higher end processes over video editing. Premiere is not going to take advantage of those cores. And in fact, too many cores might actually slow down certain functions that don't require that many cores, because multiple cores tend to help with multi-core processes, any kind of process that will actually take advantage of it. Some processes only need 1 core to work, and that might be something simple like just hitting save. And if you have too many cores in the system, it actually slows down those simpler processes. 28-core machine will take an extra 4 or 5 seconds to save versus a machine with less cores. So they're saying the sweet spot here is 8. You can take that number a little bit higher. I might build the system out if I was building a tower with like 12, but they're saying 8 is the sweet spot. So you don't have to add a ton of cores to the CPU to get good performance here. But again, I don't go overboard. I think once you start getting into past 18 cores or whatever, you're not going to see much of a performance gain. Okay. And they're also saying if you want to upgrade the amount of RAM that you need. Now, Premiere does not have a cap on the amount of RAM it can use. You can use all the RAM in your system, but rarely have I seen it go over a certain amount. I think the most I've ever seen it use is maybe 4 gigs at a time. But the more RAM you have in your system, the better you can have multiple applications open at the same time. So with a lot of RAM, so for example, if I have 64 gigabytes of RAM, which I have on a Mac Pro Tower that I use, that Mac can have Premiere, After Effects, and Audition, and even Photoshop open at the same time. And it's totally fine. And I can work and bounce back and forth easily. And obviously, if I have more RAM than that, I can keep multiple applications open, give them a little more memory to work with. If you're building a system to use Premiere with After Effects, get as much RAM as you can max out in that thing, as much as you can afford. After Effects will gobble up the RAM for its previews, and you'll be happy to have a lot of it. And again, if you are working a lot between Premiere and After Effects, keeping them open at the same time, you're going to want a lot of RAM for those applications. I have seen Premiere have a memory spike. It does happen on occasion. You're reading a large project, it has to reference a lot of media as it's being pulled in. It's very rare, though, that it happens, but occasionally you'll see an out-of-memory error, and Premiere will use all the RAM in your system. Again, that's rare, not something you don't need to worry about. So again, that is this page here, optimizing your system for Premiere Pro and After Effects, and those builds that I showed you on the hardware setup pages are taken from those specs. That's how to put your system together to maximize your output. All right, I think Premiere Pro is back up. Okay, so let's see if we can get that working here. And we'll go back out. Way too many applications open. There we go, Premiere Pro. I'm gonna go File, New Project. There we go. Okay, so when you're first creating a new project, the splash screen is gone, by the way, but I just went to the new project window. It's gonna ask me, first of all, what am I title it? So we're gonna call this just Premiere Pro 101. Okay, and right off the bat, we can set where it goes. All right, so I'm gonna leave it here. Actually, I'm going to put that into the hierarchy that we made because we went through all those steps. So we're going to go back here, and I'm going to go here, and we're going to put that in project files because that's where that belongs. All right, and I'm going to use best practices like I mentioned. So here's today's date for 2020. Look at that, and then we have my initials as the editor. And I'm going to call this version 1. Now again, your naming system at your location might be different. This is just what I happen to use. I can keep track of the editor, the date this was made, and the version number of the project. In case I have to make a copy of this project on the same day, I'm gonna label that version 2, all right? So what do we have underneath this? The renderer, again, this is where we get into the Mercury playback engine, and it needs a piece of render software to work with my GPU. I'm on a Mac, I have 2 options here. I can go Metal or I can go OpenCL. And on the newer versions, it says deprecated. OpenCL is not going anywhere, but it's being called deprecated or obsolete, but it is still an option. And the reason you want to have this option here is in case Metal gives you issues, which I actually do have issues with Metal. My laptop's not working well with Metal right now. I actually have an older NVIDIA card. Long story short, there's no drivers for that anymore. It still works, but it's not happy with Metal acceleration in Premiere Pro 14. Luckily, I was able to switch to OpenCL, and I'm fine, okay? So I'm good to go there. And I also have my the option to go to software only. Now, what does that mean? If I go to software only, what it's going to do is bypass the GPU completely. This is more of a troubleshooting step if you need to go this route. Why? If your GPU is giving you issues, glitches, problems, and nothing seems to be working, you can switch it to software only. Now, things will take longer. Your renders will take longer. Your previews will take longer. Your exports will take longer. But it's basically bypassing a potential bottleneck if you're having GPU problems. And it's a troubleshooting step a lot of people recommend. If you see glitches in your output, you see glitches in your renders, or you're having weird crashes or something like that, you can try software only. And if it works, then you can look at your GPU. And especially on the PC side, GPU drivers are everything. And you may have a NVIDIA card, in which case you would not see Metal in this list because that's not available in the Windows system. You might see CUDA. So you would pick the CUDA acceleration for your card. And if that doesn't work, switch to software only, get your work done. And in the meantime, research your card based on your version of Windows and see if maybe there was an update to the card and you need to install a new driver for it and get that back up and running, okay? Underneath this, frames, obviously, if you're working on a film that was shot with 16 to 35 millimeter, you can go to frames. Most people are fine with timecode, which is for basic digital video, okay? Display format, audio samples, that's totally fine. Capture format, DV. Capturing is still built into Premiere. So if you have that deck, are you doing DV or HDV? If you don't know what those mean and you've never used them, then don't worry about it because you probably will never use them. Some of us who are old remember DV tapes and may actually have a few sticking around in the closet and have a deck that we can plug in. Premiere can still read that deck and can still capture and pull that format in. And that's basically the setting that's saying, what do you want me to do with that? Below that, this is actually a nice setting, and I don't know why it's here. I think it should be in the preferences, but they put it in the new project window. If this is checked, all track item names and label colors will match the corresponding project item. So what this is asking is, if you have an item in the bin and you rename it, would you like to see that name ripple through into the sequence? We've already applied that clip to part of your sequence. And for me, I would say yes. If I change that clip name from a long string of numbers that the camera made and change that to John's interview take 1, when I cut that clip into a sequence, I would love for it to say John's interview take 1 and not the original numbers. This checkbox will make that possible. Also, if I like that clip, I may want to change the label color to something besides the default so I can keep track of it. If this box is not checked, that label color will not ripple into the timeline. So that's what it's asking me here. I always turn this on. I particularly like that feature, so I keep it there. By the way, this whole window, you can go back to it, okay? This is not setting anything in stone. All the things in here, you can go back to it once the project is set up, okay? So that's kind of nice. Here are my scratch discs, okay? And by default, a lot of these will pop up as same as project, usually when you start a new project. So I'm gonna set that there right now. That's fine. And so let's go through all of these. So what are these asking me? Captured video, again, this is old school. This is if you were capturing from a deck of any kind. It doesn't have to be DV. You could also be plugging in something like an old DV cam deck, not DV cam, HD cam, sorry, or Beta SP or some old format, and you have the correct hardware to pull that in. It's asking you as you live capture that, where is it going? Okay, and that's a function of in the scratch discs. Captured audio is the one that I mentioned earlier, the one that is the outlier in the scratch disk world, it's super important because there'll be a note in the preferences as we go through the preferences for certain types of audio files that Premiere actually generates on its own. If you are going to Adobe Audition from Premiere, you want to keep track of this captured audio feature because those files will be written. You will create a new version of that file that is written to protect the original version. It will make a copy, and that copy is what Audition will work on and then bounce back to Premiere. That copy has to live somewhere, and that is a function of captured audio. That's where that needs to go. Also, if you use the voiceover tool in Premiere Pro and record voiceover directly to your timeline, that is also where this goes. Captured audio is for voiceovers within Premiere. So you want to actually keep track of this because that may be audio that you want down the road. You don't want to throw that away with the rest of your scratch disk. That may actually be very important. Normally, if you're capturing from a tape, you don't split off the audio, so that's not what this feature is for. It's for things that are generated within Premiere Pro in the audio world. Okay. Video previews. These are your renders or previews. Quick note on this, by the way, and I see this happen a lot. If you are an After Effects person, a visual graphics effects artist, and you work in After Effects, you're used to the term render meaning output. In other words, you're done with the comp, you throw it into the render queue, you render it, and now you have a QuickTime file or something that's on your hard drive, and you consider that to be a render. Old school editors tend to look at renders as something else. Render is when we have a timeline up and we have a lot of yellow or red bars and we can't see the effects that we've added. We need to render the timeline so that we can see everything and get real-time playback. That is not an export file, that's known as a render. So those two terms tend to cause confusion, especially on a bulletin board where you're trying to ask a question and you're not sure, are they referring to an output or are they referring to the file that's generated within the software? So in Premiere, it's known as a video preview. I still call it rendering. A lot of editors still do, but those are previews. And when you preview the entire timeline, what happens is the Premiere, based on the codec set for the timeline, will write these render files, and those files will be written to a disk, and that's what it uses for playback on the timeline there. So that's what generally gets generated inside the scratch disk folder. So it's asking, where is this going to go? Same thing for audio previews. You can preview your audio, especially if you have a lot of it and it's having trouble playing it all back, or you have a lot of compressed files like MP3s. You want to preview those, and it's asking where do those go. Autosave. This is super important. This is one of the few that I actually put on the main drive. Okay, and I'll show that setting in a second. My personal theory on autosaves is you should get them off of whatever drive the project itself is living on. The autosave is something that Premiere Pro writes every few minutes, and you can set the interval in the preferences. The autosaves will save your bacon. Okay, the autosaves will give you a snapshot of your project, and depending on the frequency of your saves, you go back to it, and hopefully if you do have a hard crash or your project file gets corrupted, which is rare, but it does happen. If you have a bad crash and you've lost all that work, you can go back to your last autosave, and hopefully you've only lost a couple of minutes, or maybe 5–10 minutes at most, that you have to redo. And I put them not next to the project file, not in the scratch disk. I put them actually on the boot drive. It is one of the few things I do allow to be written to the boot drive. They write quickly. It's not taking up a lot of bandwidth. But what that gives me is a form of insurance. If my RAID or my media storage that's holding the project file, if it fails, and I mean really fails, goes down, can't get it back up, all the data's gone, I can, first of all, go back to my camera cards. Hopefully I haven't erased them yet, and get that media back. I can go back to the backup of my RAID, which I hopefully have somewhere as well. But I want to, that backup may have been a couple of days old, for example. So I've lost all of that work. I want my autosave to not have been on that RAID at all. I put the autosave on the boot drive in a special folder, and I just make sure to clean them out occasionally so I don't keep them in there for too long. The autosave should go on a separate disk. You can put it on the cache disk if you want. That's also an option if there's space for it. Just get it on a separate drive, physically separate drive from your main project folder, okay? So that's my advice there. Now, below this, these don't get used a lot, but in case you are downloading from various libraries, when you buy Creative Cloud, you have the library system that's built into the whole thing. And libraries can contain anything. They can contain media, colors, logos. You can use those libraries in all of the software. So let's say I set up a library of palettes of colors in Photoshop, or I get a logo from a client. I make a new library with that client's name. I put the logo in there and I put in their company colors, and I can access that library information in all of the applications. It's a nice feature. And it's just saying if you have to download something, those all live in the cloud, okay, in Adobe Creative Cloud, because you get storage with your membership. Those all live in the cloud. If you want to use it, it has to actually physically download it to your machine. And that's asking you, where do you want that to go? Okay, so that's what that is for. And then finally down here at the bottom is motion graphics template media. There's built-in motion graphics in Premiere Pro. It's called Essential Graphics now. And there are templates for things like lower thirds, bumpers, titles, things like that. And if you open one of those, again, it has to download it to your computer. Some of that also lives in the cloud. And it's basically asking, okay, where do you want this to go? If you do choose to use this, you put it in your project, where is it going? Where is it living? I want to write a physical file to your machine. So let's go through and set all of the scratch disk now that I've explained it all. So captured video, we're just going to put that in custom folder. So actually what I do here, I just hit the browse button, okay? And I'm going to go here. And normally this would be an external drive, so just pretend we're on an external RAID right now. But I'm going to go back out to my folder template, and I'm going to put that in Scratch, okay? Captured audio, as I mentioned, that's the one that's the outlier. That's the one that's important. That actually goes into audio, okay? Put that there. Video previews, again, that's a big one. That's where things are going to get written. We're going to go back to Scratch for that, okay? So I'll put that there. There we go, Scratch. Now, the nice thing is the last thing that was set, it remembers. So if I just hit Browse again, it's now back to Scratch. It doesn't reset it to some other document, at least not on the Mac OS. So that's kind of nice. And I'm gonna go ahead and set my CC library downloads. I'm skipping over autosave for a second. And I'm gonna put the CC library downloads in graphics, okay? And they'll just write themselves in there if they get downloaded. These two at the bottom, again, they don't always get written. I rarely see it in the workflows that I have, but in case I do pull them in, that's where they'll go. And autosave, I'm going to actually, I'll just put it on my desktop, but I have usually have a dedicated client folder somewhere on my hard drive for that. So I'll just put the client name, and then autosaves. Again, that is on my boot drive. That is not on my separate external media. And that's where my autosaves go, okay? So all of these are not going to the same place. That's why take a second when you create a new project, set all this stuff up. What happens 9 times out of 10, especially if someone's in a hurry or they're a new editor and they don't know how all this stuff works, you will find all of this information right next to your project file. That project file initial folder will be a mess. It will have all your scratch disks in there, and that will create problems for you. And again, the reason why I keep them separate is because when I go back here at the end of the process, I need to archive this, take this entire project, get it off of my RAID, put it on another drive or an LTO tape, and get it off of my system. I want to be able to take this folder right here and throw it away. And I can't do that if it's all living in here. I have to go through and sort through all of it and delete the stuff that I don't want. So that's where that winds up. Also, by default, a lot of times, especially on the Mac, you have your documents folder, which is full of all kinds of stuff that all the programs like to write. And Adobe loves to write directly to the documents folder by default as well. So you may find all the stuff is in here and not on your external drive. So take a minute when you first open up your project, set all of this. It will remember it, okay? And you're good to go. And so have a convention here. And obviously, if you're in a larger facility, this is more something for your assistant editor to know and to work on, and they'll take care of this for you, but know where all this stuff is, know where all your information is. The last thing on this list is ingest. We're not going to cover that, and most times we turn that off. What is ingest for? You can tell Premiere to do some things with the media. So you can ingest, do a true ingest. In other words, put in the camera card, pull in that information, and it will copy it to your destination folder. Okay, you can do that. Same as project, choose location. I could set this to my raw footage location. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here. This could be what I do with this. Okay, that's not how I bring in my media generally. I don't use ingest for that. I wanna be able to hunt, I wanna be able to selectively pick certain items off of the camera cards, get rid of the false takes, get rid of the ones that bombed, just pull in the stuff that I want. So I don't use that function. The other thing it is used for, though, is creating proxies, okay? Let's see if I have any coffee left. So what are proxies? We're not going to get too deep into that today as an intro piece, but proxies are smaller versions of your regular media that take up less space and are easier to work with. And they're generally a smaller size. And so, for example, let's say you're working with RED footage. RED is 5K, 8K, massive files, usually, if you're shooting that high on a certain RED camera. They have a lot of bandwidth. They require a fast drive, especially if you have multiple streams. God help you if you're doing multicam with RED 8K on a slow machine. It's going to bring it to a grinding halt. So what do you do in that circumstance? You ask Premiere to create a proxy of that 8K file, and that file might be HD, it might even be a 720 file, and it doesn't use the RED RAW codec. It uses something like ProRes Proxy, which is built for that, which is a very small, lightweight codec, does not take up a lot of space, and it will write those files, and then you can switch back and forth between them. In the project, you can actually work with just the proxies, and editing proxies is a breeze, and then you can switch back to full res media for things like color correction and to finish up your project. But you actually get better real-time playback with the proxy. There's a whole workflow to that. Again, it's not part of today's session. If you were to take my 101 class, we could cover proxies, or the 201 class will definitely cover proxies. So you can do that at jump, but I like to do that again on my own. I can certainly do that later. I can tell Premiere to write proxies while I'm working. I don't have to do this now. If I set that as an ingest, everything I bring into the program is going to get a proxy, okay? All the media. Maybe I don't want that. So 9 times out of 10, I just keep this off, and that's all you have to do, all right? Again, this can all be done later on down the road. So keep ingest off unless you know you definitely want it. Coffee is life. Okay, so there we go. Those settings. And we haven't even edited yet. We've been at this for a while now, but take the time, do these steps. When you first create a project, you will thank yourself later. If you organize at the beginning, you won't have to worry about where things are at the end. You won't have to hunt all over your hard drives to find all your assets. You won't have to worry about the scratch disk. You can just throw it away. Take the time now to get this set up properly, and you'll be happy, okay? And again, that was in the general, set up your graphics card. And again, you probably just have to do this once. If you're having success with Metal or with CUDA on a PC, just leave that alone. It will it'll automatically default to that on a new project anyway. In my case, I'm using OpenCL because I do know I have issues with Metal. Scratch disks, set those according to your project folder structure, and put the auto saves on a different drive than that project, and leave ingest off unless you want to create proxies or physically bring in the media as you import it, bring it into your raw footage folder, okay? Now I'm hit okay, finally, and here is the full interface. So here we are. That's the standard, this is the standard editing workspace, okay? Big project over here, my source window, my program window, and my timeline, okay? And in between is the toolbar, and I've got some audio meters over here on the right. Let me try to get the Zoom stuff out of the way here. Where are we? Because I have multiple desktops going here. There we go. Share that window. Okay, great. Okay, so that should be shared right now. Okay, wonderful. So here are all my folders here. And so again, sorry, panels. Okay, so this is the editing workspace. If I want a different workspace, I would go to, say, Assembly. Okay, and Assembly gives me a larger project window, and source and program are actually docked one behind each other, and timeline's down here. There's the toolbar. So you can choose the one you want. You don't have to work in any particular one. And by choosing the different workspaces, it sets up the program based on how they think you might want all this configured. So if I go to color, for example, this pops open over here on the right. I have the whole Lumetri window. This is Adobe's built-in color corrector, okay? And I have a program monitor and a source monitor, but I also have the scopes that are up. Now, nothing's here right now. I have no media in here, so you're not seeing the differences. So these rooms are set up based on what they think you want to see, and you can certainly change them. I'm gonna go back to editing. and we're going to make a new workspace. Okay, so how do we do that? This is the Adobe's panel system that you see across multiple applications now. They basically all use this, and the panels are handy for moving things around. Okay, and how do you move something around? So I'll show you that right now. Let's say I want this info tab to be up here. I want it docked in the source window and not down here next to the project file. So I just take it by the name, I click and I drag, and there it is. Okay, so if you saw that, I'll put it back. All right, so what I'm doing with the info window is I'm dragging it and dropping it, and this purple is telling me where it's going to go. Okay, in this case, if I drag it into the center, it becomes a tab in the same panel. Okay, but what if I didn't want it centered? What if I wanted it to be another panel next to all that information, but docked within the same palette? I can drag it up and I put it to the right. That's what these little purple indicators mean. I'm docking it to the right. See that info is now, pull this down a little bit. Info is now in its own panel within the same palette. Okay, so it's still, I'm just hope that's not distracting. The zoom interface kind of gets in the way, so I'm just trying to make that less visible. Okay, great. Here we are there. See, so now I can see the source and the info at the same time. Okay, so that's pretty handy. So I can skinny that up, hopefully. Let's see, go there. So whenever you hover between two panels, you get this little double arrow with the two vertical lines. That's telling me I can now slide these apart and together and skinny it up or make it really wide. And again, these are docked together. It's all this one panel. If I squeeze from over here, program gets wider and info gets smaller. I can always go under window and turn it off completely. So I uncheck info. That didn't work because it's on its own, so it needs to be in its own thing. And so we'll go back here. Info is a little tricky. It doesn't have its little hamburger menu. It's kind of a pain. So we're going to go to black. Just going to create something here. That should give you, there we go. And now can I pull you? There we go. I'm putting it back. Info, window. Doesn't want to go away. Moving on. Okay, so let's say I go to libraries. I don't want libraries. If I go to view, under window. Again, those are the libraries that I mentioned. Oh, I'm turning them back on and off. That's right. So user error. So if I want to get rid of something, so here's libraries. I don't use libraries a ton usually, so I like to turn that off. How do I get rid of one of these I don't want to see? I just click on the hamburger menu and I go close panel. Okay, and it's gone. If I want to see it, I go back under window and I go back to libraries and it pops back in the same place it used to be. Okay, so I'm just going to close that panel again. I'm going to close info now. I don't want it. There we go, close panel. Again, that's the little hamburger menu here. There's a lot of tiny sub menus, buttons, switches in Premiere. We're going to go through all of them. That's the point of today's session. Show you where all this stuff lives, and we can go from there. So again, here's the project window. If I want to make something docked outside of everything, I can certainly do that. So I will take Media Browser, for example. Now, if I move it here to the left, it's going to be docked next to this project window right here. But let's say I want it to cover the entire left side from top to bottom. How do I get it there? So again, I just grab it by the text and pull it. And if I pull it off the edge, notice how instead of purple, it's green. If I let go, now Media Browser takes up the entire height of the entire interface. I can pull it back over. And now I have more of a quadrant system with the other four panels here with the toolbars in the center. Let's say I want a window to float on top of the others. I don't want it docked anywhere. I want it to be its own thing, okay, with its own button system. So on Mac or Windows, you have, minimize, maximize, and close usually. You'll notice that's not the case with all of these palettes. They're completely contained within a single application frame. Let's say I want those buttons on this. So I right click and I go undock. And now Media Browser is free floating. It has the minimize, maximize buttons that I can go to pull things in. Okay. So that's how I pull that off. And if I was going to make a dual monitor setup, this is how I would do it. Right now I have a single monitor that I'm previewing with you. You can't see a dual monitor. I actually have 3 running right now. If I was to make a dual monitor setup, I would undock. the palette that I wanted on that second monitor, and then I would just pull it off screen onto the second monitor. I just did that. Media browser would be over there. I'd be able to see things much, much larger. Sometimes that's my project window, so I can see all of my assets, or multiple project windows, I can see all my bins. Or sometimes if I'm working on something that's really dense, take the whole timeline window, put it over onto the second Mac screen over here. That way I can see things nice and big and then work on my other tool palettes on my second window. I do the same thing in After Effects. Sometimes I will keep the comp on the main window, and I will take the timeline panel that contains the comp with however many tracks and layers that I have going, put it on my second monitor so I can expand them all and see everything. So this, again, this works on multiple applications, all right? So let's say I've got this custom configured the way I want it. I love this arrangement. This is what I want to save. How do I do that? I don't want to overwrite this version. I want to be able to go back to this room here, which is called editing. It's nice to keep those the way they came from basically the factory defaults. I don't like to overwrite these. So I want to save it as a new workspace. I go into Window, Workspaces, save as new workspace, and I'll give it a name. Call this Premiere 101, version 1. Okay. And where does that live now? You'll notice at the top that just popped up over here on the far right of the workspace bar across the top here. It's also available under Window Workspaces. It's right there at the bottom. Okay. That's pretty handy. You'll notice too, these workspaces have keyboard shortcuts assigned to them, but it only goes up to 9, okay? And then below that, they don't have keyboard shortcuts. This is a caveat with the workspace system. You can name them whatever you want, and you can rearrange the order of them in the bar, for example. So the way you reset the order is you go to Edit Workspaces here. You get this list, and if I love this workspace, I can take it and drag it so it is actually first. Okay? Put that above learning, that will be first. And I hit OK, and now it's over here. Okay, it just popped into the upper left corner, is now first in the list. I can click it, but that did not assign it a keyboard shortcut. Why? This menu dictates the keyboard shortcut. Go back to it, sorry. And it is alphabetical. Okay, the workspace I have for 2 monitors, Big Project and Essentials, that's one that I saved. That's a custom for 2 monitors. That is top of the list because it contains a number. And then you'll notice below this, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, it's alphabetical. So, and if you want to have a keyboard shortcut assigned to your workspace, you can pop to it quickly or pop to the ones that you want. The way to trick that is to edit the name of the workspace. Here, I'm in, again, Edit Workspaces. I double click, and you give it a number. That's what I recommend. So I'm giving that a 1. I hit OK. And now it is at the top. So all my favorite workspaces, I give numbers, and then they appear in order that I want. And now that has been assigned a keyboard shortcut of Option-Shift-1. Okay, so again, you have to trick the program a little bit to get what you want in this menu. You have to number them or give them a letter A, B, C, D, or E, or up through 9 options to get the keyboard shortcut. Now, if I want to get rid of stuff that I don't want to see, I can go to, let's see, Edit Workspaces again. Okay, so on this menu, I can see this list, and I can get rid of the ones that I don't normally use. So there's a Libraries workspace. Again, I don't use that very much. I'm going to drag that into what's called the Overflow menu, along with a few of these other ones. I don't need this right now. I don't need John's laptop. So I'm just going to drag some stuff out. Hit OK. What does that mean? So they're now gone from the top here. The Overflow menu are these 2 double arrows right here. I click on that, and there they are. That's the Overflow. Okay, and I have an Edit Workspaces shortcut there. I can go back to this window directly from there. Do not show. Let's put Libraries there. Sorry, Libraries is always my whipping boy. I'm always moving that one around. So that will not show up at all. It still exists, but I have to edit the workspaces to pull it back out of the Do Not Show menu. Okay, so that's workspaces. And if I get in the weeds, let's see, I'll hit cancel. So if I really get in the weeds here and I start screwing around and I move too quickly and I really make a hash out of my workspace and put things where they don't go and really make a mess of things on dock, and my audio meter's floating somewhere crazy. I've gone nuts. My workspace has gone rogue on me. That's a total nightmare. very easily, if I'm in the workspace that I want and I've screwed it up, I go into Window, Workspaces, Reset to Save Layout, and it pops back to what I originally saved. Okay, I'm gonna go back to Editing because it's a simple one. And ooh, I can move that out of the way. There we go. Got zoom out of the way. There we go. Workspaces and go back to Editing. Whoops, come on now. There we go. And now it is back there, and I need to reset that workspace. So I go back and reset the Save Layout. There we go. Ah, much nicer. Okay, so now I can pull this up to full piece. Hopefully my dock will stop popping up at the bottom there. Okay, so now I'm in a more standard workspace here. Usually I use editing for most of my work, and then I pop into color or some of the other effects tabs when I'm in more in the finishing phase of things. And I like to start with assembly because that brings up the media browser and a big project window. Assembly is made for just ingesting all of my media and bringing it into the project so that I can have that ready to go, okay? And that is how we get this all set up. Let me just make sure I'm checking my notes, making sure I'm covered everything. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to mention, I'll go back to editing here really quick. There are some built-in keyboard shortcuts to the most commonly used panels, okay? So what are those? If you hold down the Shift key, and when I mention keyboard shortcuts, these are ones that are built into Premiere. You can alter the keyboard shortcuts. I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. But the ones that are built into Premiere are great for getting around the workspace. You can customize them later, but I recommend leaving these because they're really handy to remember. And it's holding down the Shift key and using the numbers. So if I hold down Shift, right now I'm in the project window. You can tell which one you're in. There's a blue outline around the panel you're currently in. Right now I'm in project. If I hit Shift 2, notice that the blue outline jumps to the source window. If I hit Shift 3, it goes to the timeline. If I hit Shift 4, it goes to the program monitor. Okay, and if I hit Shift 1, I'm back on project. So it goes from 1 through 4, project, source, timeline, program. Okay, that pops between those panels. If you're working quickly, I'm a mouse and keyboard guy. You click on things with the mouse and use my other hand to quickly punch in keyboard shortcuts, and it's my muscle memory, Shift 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the other thing most people don't know about, which is super, super handy, you can make any palette as large as the entire interface with one key, and then shrink it back down again so you don't have to, so if I need to see a large project window and I don't want to pop into assembly, I want to stay in my editing workspace here, but I don't want to have to do this, right? Move this over, tediously shrink, all that stuff, just so I can see a larger window here. Isn't there a better way to do that? Of course there is. Let's set this back to normal. If I'm in this window, I just have to do this. Okay, I believe I'm not using the defaults. Let me go back to reset my keyboard shortcuts here. Yeah, I have my custom keyboard set up. So let's just go back to Premiere Pro defaults. There we go. What key am I pushing? This is the tilde. And I know your next question is, John, where is that? If you don't already know, the tilde looks like that little squiggly line like this. It is above the tab key and below the escape key, if you have one, at the upper left of your keyboard. That is the tilde, or there's also an accent mark that's at the bottom of that key as well. But the squiggly lines that you're looking for, that's the tilde. If you're on any panel and you hit that key, it pops the panel open to cover the entire window. And then hit it again and it pops back to where it was. This is your new best friend. If you're trying to find a piece of media and you don't want to scroll through your entire project window and go through all the bins, you just pop it open very large, and that gives you more real estate. You can find what you want. If your boss or your client is looking over your shoulder and you're like, hey, show me that nice and big, and you don't have an external monitor hooked up for output, you can just simply go to the program monitor, and actually that would have been Shift 4, okay, and then tilde, and nice and big, play it back that way. Again, you're still seeing the program interface. You may want to set up a different thing, but quick and dirty, pop the program monitor out nice and big, or the source monitor. Okay, so I'll go back, I'll go Shift 2, tilde, boom. And then tilde again, drops it back. Okay, super, super handy feature to have there. And I'm gonna hit save, because I wanna hit save. All right, so that's that. And so we moved the windows around and we created some custom workspaces, that's good. Let's talk about those keyboard shortcuts right now and where do those live. And this is where the rubber meets the road for a lot of editors. What key do I push And can I set my own keys? The answer is, of course, absolutely. And we're going to go up here under Premiere Pro. Now, this is the one thing that does bug me. All the Adobe products put this in a different place. So where this lives in Photoshop and After Effects is not where it lives in Premiere. It drives me a little crazy. I wish they were all under this menu. Premiere, I think, does it right. It has it right here in the main menu where it belongs, next to Preferences, which is right here. We'll get into that. And then right below that is Keyboard Shortcuts. So let's click that. This is a super nice, easy, customizable keyboard shortcut window. And it's showing me right off the bat what is being done on the application. So right here are all these, all the keys represented, and it's telling me what each key does. This is the default, and I know it's the default because up here under Keyboard Layout Preset, I have Adobe Premiere Pro default. Okay, so I know that that is my setup right there. And this is so these are all what came with the software. This is what's been programmed, and it's telling me right here. So if I want to go to Slip Tool, where's that? That is under Y. The slide is U, for example. Hand tool is H. Play, stop, toggle. Now, what do the green things mean? Green is a application that's kind of an evergreen thing. In other words, that's not something that Premiere wants you to change, and in fact, it's not going to allow you to take that functionality off of the key. So if you see green, that's important to the software. That means, hey, I have dedicated this key to this one function. Please don't try and remove it. So for example, the space bar is always play, pause. That's kind of uniform across all editing systems. Space bar has always been play for the longest time. And I is set in or mark out. Example is here. Pen tool is piece. There's something going on here that it wants to maintain for the system. Zoom in and out is up here assigned to the plus and minus keys at the top of the system. Some of these you can reassign without fear. They're just purple. But that's what the green is telling you, that the application has assigned something. If you just hover over the tool, it's telling you what all has been assigned to it. And there can be multiple things assigned to each key, which is why they have this slash through it, okay? Excuse me. So there are keyboard combinations that will allow you to select different things. So for example, if you hold down the Shift key, you get a whole different set of tools. You can simulate that by clicking on the Shift key on the keyboard. And I don't have to hold it down, I just click it once. Okay? And there